This unit will cover sex determination, sex linkage, and sex-limited problems. Now, whether one is a male or a female is determined at conception. Humans are monoecious, meaning that they are either male or female, and that they carry one type of gamete. Females carry the egg, males carry the sperm. Other organisms can be dioecious, meaning they carry both types of gametes in the same body. For example, earthworms. Now, human males are heterogametic, meaning they have two different sex chromosomes. They have an X and a Y. Females are homogametic, meaning they carry an X and an X. In other species, it can vary. Birds and snakes can be ZZ for males. Females can be ZW. But we will be concentrating on those organisms where the male is XY and the female is XX. Now, the noise you hear in the background are my 3 pugs snoring. But as we continue, grasshoppers, the females contain 24 chromosomes. They are XX. The males contain 23 chromosomes, and they are XO. Now, when we look at an X and a Y chromosome, you can see that over on the figure on the right. They're both labeled. You'll notice that the X chromosome is much larger. It contains over 1,500 different genes, while the Y chromosome, being much smaller, contains 231 genes. Most of these genes are going to be associated with male development and the sexness of males. Now, as we look at the anatomy of the Y chromosome, you'll notice that I have a diagram with all the parts labeled. 5% of the chromosome is a pseudo-autosomal region, meaning it contains genes that are shared with X chromosomes. The male-specific region, which is 95% of the chromosome, contains the majority of the genes. This is going to include the SRY and the AZF. Both of these are needed for sperm production and for the development of becoming a male. So the SR gene is the gene that controls the expression of other genes that simulate male development. So when one is developing testes, a male's developing testes, this secretes a hormone called anti-Müllerian hormone, and this destroys the female structures. Testosterone and DHT also are secreted, and those stimulate male structure development. So that there are different abnormalities in sexual development. There can be pseudohermaphrodism, and this is the presence of male and female structures, but at different stages of life. There's also androgen insensitivity syndrome. Now, on this one right here, they lack the androgen receptor, so the SRY gene is not recognized. And so, even though the body is XY and they're producing lots of testosterone, the person's body recognizes that as estrogen and converts it to estrogen, and then develops into a female. There's also the 5-alpha reductase deficiency, which is the absence of DHT, and that's going to keep male development from occurring. And then there's congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where you have high levels of androgens in there. So I mentioned the pseudohermaphrodism. Let me give you an example of that. In the Dominican Republic in the 1970s, there was this small village area. They had 22 girls that were born in the village. When the girls reached puberty, they transformed into boys. And then the parents, instead of being upset about that, had a huge party. But there's one example, probably due to a lot of inbreeding in that area, for there to be so many individuals affected. So just continuing, that again, consanguinity means that they were related, that you had some inbreeding going on. Again, the parents were very happy their girls had turned into sons, and they were actually given their own gender at the age of 12, and that was just kind of an odd situation. It was due to a 5-alpha reductase deficiency, and again, that's not something that's common, but anytime that you have relatives intermarrying, you can have those rare traits being passed on continuously. So just to give you an idea, chromosomal genetics, your XY if you're a male, your XX if you're a female, that occurs at the time of fertilization. Gonadal sex, which is where you have the undifferentiated structures, and they start to form either testes or ovaries. That's about 6 weeks after fertilization. Phenotypic sex, this is where you have the development of the internal and the external reproductive structures, and then it continues as a male or a female in response to hormones. That's about 8 weeks after fertilization and continues up to puberty. Gender identity, that's something completely different. Sexual orientation, something completely different. No genetic connections have been made where a person identifies as either a female when they're a male, or there's no identified gay gene. That is completely with environmental conditions and an individual choosing not to live based on scripture, but there is no physiological basis for that. Sex ratio is the proportion of males to females in a population. The primary sex ratio is at conception. Primary sex ratio typically is a little bit higher, favoring males over females. Secondary sex ratio is at birth, again a little bit higher towards males than females, and we mean a 51 to 49% ratio. Tertiary sex ratio is at maturity, and that's so that by the time the individuals reach that mark, maturity age, you should have a 1-to-1 ratio. However, that can be altered based on environmental conditions. The example that we'll give you is China's one-child policy, and that's led to a huge scarcity of females. So much so that they believe by this year there should be 20 million men without female partners because of the one-child policy. They started addressing this a few years back, and they were allowing parents to have 2 children. If the first child was a female, they could have a second child, but it had to be a male. And individuals who adopt out of China can only adopt females. So the average number of births per woman fell from 5.4 in 1971 to 1.8 in 2001. There's been about 117 boys born per every 100 girls. And then in addition to that, there has been a lot of infertility issues in China over the past several years. That has resulted in the government now promoting a Care for Girls program, and that awards housing subsidies and scholarships to families that are willing to have a daughter. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, it favors females. So people over the age of 65 in the United States, there are 75 men for every 100 females. That means if the guys are willing to wait till age 65, they will have their pick of geriatric women to marry.